Hello and welcome to Strathmore's first online workshop series for 2018. My name is Kelly Eddington and today we're going to practice painting facial features. My cousin Tyler Sharp and his wife Natalie Walker are professional photographers and they took the reference photos for this project. I love to make my own toned paper with watercolors, and I'm using one of my biggest brushes to do this. I mixed some pink, brown, and purple to make a color that's not too dark and not too light. Feel free to mix a few colors of your own choice and add a fair amount of water to them. Then paint them all over the surface of your paper. I'll tip my paper to even out the color, and I'll use a paper towel to soak up any puddles that form around the edge. I'm working on Strathmore's 400 series watercolor paper again. This time it's on a block, which means it has adhesive all the way around, so I don't have to tape it down. If your paper is not on a block, you'll need to tape your paper securely to a board before you start. Once your paper is covered with paint, let it dry for a few hours or overnight. So this is what it looks like when it's dry. Notice how much lighter it is. My reference photos are on my iPad and I'll use that to zoom in on details. This is my favorite way to work. I've drawn some basic outlines of the features in pencil. Most watercolor painters do preliminary drawings very lightly so they'll be invisible under the paint, but for the sake of this lesson I'll go over my work a little darker. Reference photos are available on the instruction sheet you can download from Strathmore's website, along with a template if you need help getting started. So we've got 2 eyes, 2 noses, and 2 mouths to practice on. I'm outlining the shadows here too. It's always good to know where they are. I don't use black paint in my full color paintings, but it's fun to practice with. You can use black or any dark color you like, such as purple, brown, dark green, or blue. As you can see, when I add water to black, I get a nice gray, and I've painted most of this little girl's iris with it, leaving the pupil and the sparkle alone. While this was wet, I dropped some darker black around the outside of the shape. I'll work on other parts while that dries. I like to skip around in my paintings. If I painted something dark and it touched the iris, the two would bleed together, so I'm painting parts of the eye that aren't right beside the iris right now, and that's basically how I control my paint. I'm painting with gray here and will gradually get darker, just concentrating on the main shapes I see. The pink of the paper represents the general color of her skin, so I'm painting everything that's darker than her skin. Later on, I'll use some white paint on the brightest parts of her eye. So we've got the start of the brow, and once I noticed the iris was dry, I painted a thicker dark line for her lashes. I really don't have to paint them one lash at a time because they're all clustered together in one shape. The pupil is pure black, or whatever your color of choice is. Just use enough water to get it to flow, and with that, wow, the eye starts to come to life, doesn't it? Again, see how I've isolated that window-shaped sparkle. I've gone around her iris with some dark gray, leaving some of that original gray showing through near the pupil. The black iris makes me want to darken some of the other parts, and next I'll switch to a smaller brush to give her some eyelashes along her lower lid. It will look more natural if you study her lashes and paint what you see. Eyelashes aren't identical, and they don't line up in a neat little row. They grow at different rates and they cross over each other sometimes. Same thing with eyebrows. I'll add a light shadow under her eye before moving on to the next one. This eye is at a different angle, and again I'll start painting the iris gray. She has a substantial sparkle that I'll paint around, and I also felt the need to paint her eye's dark inner rim. We're looking at some bridal makeup here. Notice how you can see some white through her lashes. I've painted them as a series of short curves with some space between them. A few stick out over the left corner of her eye. And then you've got a beautiful thick line of black eyeliner over the top. It extends out past the right corner of her eye. To do this, I've painted a dark gray line and added some black while it was still wet. This leaves a gray highlight over her iris, and if you miss that, it's not that big of a deal. I've added some more darkness to her lower lash area, leaving a bit of paper showing through to the right of the iris. So that's the basic shape of her eye, and next I'll spend some time darkening parts and giving her some lower lashes. I'm using my No. 1 round brush. Back when I was 14, one of the first things my high school art teacher had us do was to go through a magazine and draw every detailed eye we saw. Same thing with noses and mouths. Isolating features like this makes drawing people less intimidating. If portraits are something you'd like to explore, I recommend you practice as many features as you can. Back to the eye. I've been going over little fiddly details, and now I'll suggest a few lines under her eye, and it's onto the eyebrow. I'll give it a layer of gray and drop some black in while it's wet. This will simulate a natural eyebrow and works better than solid black or a million little lines would, and it is fast. Finally, I'll block in some of those shadows that are just a bit darker than her general skin tone and deepen some black parts. Nose time. This one's in profile and belongs to Grace, my cousin's daughter. I'll paint the nose, but also a bit of her eye and eyebrow. When children draw noses like upside down sevens, this is the nose they're thinking about. So I'm blocking in the darker parts of the nose and some shadows around the closed eyelid. The dark background will really define the shape of this nose. And again, the pink of the paper is the general color of her skin. Everything I paint here is darker than her skin tone. It might be tempting to connect her eye and her nostrils with a black line, but really it just needs to be a light gray. I've hit her eyelashes with a very dark gray, and I'll also put it on the tip of her eyebrow and nostril. I have a little time to play with the shadows while they're still damp. If you feel out of control with your painting, you probably are using a brush that's too big or too much water or both. Okay, time for some magic. I'm painting the black background with several hits of black, and see how that nose totally makes sense now? Later on, I'll put in a handful of highlights where she's lightest, and the nose will look even more three-dimensional. Noses are challenging, to be sure, but you'll improve with practice just like anything else. And here are a few dark accents. Sometimes a lighting situation will turn the dark side of a face into a bunch of indescribable abstract shapes, and the best you can do is to simply draw what you see, even though it may not make a whole lot of sense. For me, the star of this picture is that S curve of shadows near the bridge of her nose. I filled that in with a dark gray that will get darker as we go along. That shadow connects with her eyebrow and almost everything else below it. There's a little eyelash highlight I'm attempting to isolate. Also, her eyebrow has some highlights in it. There's a tiny slice of an eye on the other side of the nose too. Okay, so I've just finished the hard part. This is the basic idea, and everything else is fine-tuning. I'll keep going over it with darker shadows until I'm satisfied, and I'm afraid I'm kind of picky about this nose. Most of what you're going to see here is me asking myself, should I go darker? And the answer is always yes. The painting is in a bit of a hot spot under my lamp, so there's a glare where the paint is wet. I've been making watercolor videos for years, and the glares are unavoidable, but you'll see what's going on as this dries. Let's make it look like a nose. What do you say? Once again, add a black background, and it all starts to make sense. This video is sped up somewhat. Each feature here took about 15 minutes to paint in real time, and that's me painting at top speed. Depending on size, a full color eye can take an hour or more for me to paint. I'll spend the rest of my time softening some of the shadow's hard lines and making parts even darker. One pet peeve I have about watercolors is the darks are rarely dark enough. Watercolors can look so airy and insubstantial. If that's what you're going for, that's fine, but if you want something to look realistic and it's dark, you have to be patient and build up your glazes until you've got a value that looks right. And with that, I'll move on to the mouths, one open and one closed. Unless you're dealing with unusual lighting, a person's top lip is usually in shadow and the bottom lip is lighter, and that's the case here. I'm painting her top lip a soft gray, leaving a lighter section near the center. While that's wet, I want to make a line of black along the lower edge. This will bleed into the rest of the lip and create a nice soft shadow. Her bottom lip is going to be about what I leave alone. Most of the paint will be in the lower third of that lip, with maybe a few light vertical wrinkles around the center. The shadow under her lip will also help define it, and I've left a bit of paper between the lower lip and its shadow. While I was talking, I painted the dark shadow inside her mouth. This defines the teeth. While that area calms down, I am working on her skin, just painting the darker shadows and leaving other parts alone. Now that the basic lip idea is pretty much done, it's time to intensify the darkest shadows. I think her face is just so beautiful. It's funny, but unless I'm painting someone I know is a bad person, I kind of fall in love with the people I paint, at least while I'm working on them. Painting forces me to see the beauty and uniqueness in every face, and there are worse ways for you to spend your time. We have 4 teeth to paint, and the ones on the outside are largely in shadow. I typically don't do much to define the lines between the teeth, but her front teeth have a bit of a gap, so I carefully painted that, making sure to use a light touch. And after painting a few minor shadows, that's pretty much it for this mouth. Last one. This is a 3/4 view, which means her head is turned and you're seeing more of one side than the other. The big side is also the dark side of her face. I defined that dark top lip over there, and I also put that dark corner in on the left. The small side of her top lip is a medium gray, and there's a pretty little dark part to the left of the center that I've tried to get. Next, I'm going to lay in the darkest shadows. These move right into her lips. I'll also get that black shadow that defines the left side of her face. So that's the basic idea. Let's see what we can do to tighten it up. First, I'll add a layer of black over the deepest shadows on the right side and work it into the lips. Then I'll paint a few wrinkles where I see them on the lower lip and intensify the left corner. The left side of her face gets a light glaze of gray, and I'll continue to build up the darkest shadows. All of the features I'm painting here are from women and girls, because most of the time they're more difficult than male features. Also, our final painting will be of a young woman. But by all means, practice painting men and boys too. Alright, I'm happy with this. On to the fun part. My palette is dry, so I'm going to turn it upside down and put some white acrylic paint on it. I don't like to put acrylics in with my watercolors. You can also use white gouache or tempera paint for this. Sometimes watercolor sets come with a white and you can try that. Or a white pastel or colored pencil will work in a pinch. I'm going to put white paint wherever these features are lightest or pure white, and that definitely includes the eye sparkles. If your paint feels sticky, add a drop of water to it. The whites of her eyes are pretty bright, but I'm only painting white where they're super white. The lashes generally cast a shadow over the whites, and if you paint them a solid white, a person can look kind of freaked out. I've added white beneath her eyebrow and a few little spots under her eye. Next eye. I've been dying to put white in that sparkle. Something about the addition of white just enlivens these features, and putting it on is so much fun, it's almost like getting a reward for painting them. Again, I'm not filling the white all the way up with highlights, mainly just that lower half. Other fun parts I'll be highlighting are the corner of her eye, her brow bone, and a couple of areas below the eye, and my favorite parts, the lightness in her lower lashes, and that little speck of white in the right corner of her eye where the lashes are. If you'd like to thin your paint to create a highlight that's more subtle, go ahead. I try not to overlap the black and white paint if I can avoid it. In general, use the white sparingly. It's just an accent. Not much to do here on the nose, but those little bits of white will go a long way to making it look even more realistic. We've got some white near the tip of her nose, the biggest part of her nostril, the corner of her eye near the lashes, near the crease of her eyelid, and a tiny bit on the bridge of her nose. Our abstract nose gets a decent amount of paint right down the bridge. Also, her lashes and the top of her eyebrow will sparkle with white, along with her upper lip. If your white isn't showing up, give it another coat. Moving on to the mouth, I want to put white where her teeth are the lightest, so not all 4 teeth, just the brightest parts of her front teeth. She also has a lovely highlight right above her top lip and in the center of her lower lip. It doesn't take much white paint to make a difference here. The thick part of her lower lip is just begging for some white, and it really makes her lip look rounder and plumper. She has a nice little highlight above her top lip too, and I'll work to add some white to the skin above and below her mouth. So much fun. I really hope you've enjoyed painting these features with me. I believe painting and drawing are physical skills similar to driving a car or typing, and like those skills, you'll get better with practice, especially if you have the love. Thanks a lot for watching, and please show me what you can do with these.